Zoro vs Sanji is not what I'm doing today. I feel like this topic has been played out too much. In fact, it was probably the most popular debate a few years ago, but now with everything Zoro has done in Wano, it's pretty clear who the winner is. But I think a more interesting debate is if they swapped fights. Now, some slower ones in the comments may be saying, well, Zoro always fights the stronger opponent, so he's gonna win every fight.
We do not care.
This discussion is actually way more interesting than you may think. And to help me with this topic, I have Zage.
What's up, folks? For those that don't know me, the name is Zage. Thanks for having me on, bro, and let's go through these matchups.
He and I have been working for months at this point, and while we may not agree on everything, he still helped me to make this video, so go subscribe to him. There are timestamps in the description for where the major fights are, Sanji vs King, Zoro vs Dofi, etc. The number of fights isn't equal, but at the end of this video, I'll count up the ratio of wins to matches for each character and see who has the better dub percentage. Before that though, I gotta lay down some rules. If you want to skip to the first fight, the time is right here. 1. The version of these characters will swap with their counterpart that was present at that time. 2. If said character was knocked at the time, then I'll just talk about if they weren't. 3. If they had support during the fight, then I'll keep the same assist, although I did try to eliminate most team battles. 4. The story leading up to the fight will be mostly the same, but during the fight, it will probably be different. For instance, King pushed Zoro to unlock Advanced Conqueror's Haki, but will Queen do the same? I don't know, you'll just have to watch and find out. But without further ado, and let's get into the video. Sanji vs Morgan. Sanji wins. I'm gonna be honest with you, most of these early East Blue fights go to Sanji pretty easily. Luffy and Zoro are not trying throughout this entire saga, and Sanji is right behind them, so yeah. Lightning round. Sanji vs Buggy. Sanji wins. Sanji vs Cabbagey. Sanji wins. Sanji vs Cat Bros. Sanji wins. Sanji vs Mihawk. So the question here isn't whether or not Sanji can win, which I'm counting against him, but more like, can he live? Mihawk will fight with a knife that Sanji has no defense against, so it's possible that he won't even get one shot by Yoru. The cook will attempt to hit Mihawk anywhere that's not his hand, but he'll get blitzed and instantly cut. As for his survival, it honestly depends on whether or not you think he has the will to live.
Zoro vs Pearl. Okay, so for Zoro's first fight, he'll be going up against Pearl and Baratier, and this fight goes to Pearl, and it's only because Zoro's knocked out and fatally injured at this point. Remember, the damage he took from Yoru left him fatigued even at Arnold Park, so most likely Zoro isn't getting out of this one. And yes, I know Luffy is there to help Zoro, but is it really a dub if Luffy just won the fight for him? Zoro vs Gin. Up next we have Gin, and if Zoro can't beat Pearl due to his condition, then against Gin, Zoro is just fucking dying. Sanji didn't even beat Gin anyway.
Sanji vs Hachi. Sanji wins. Despite Hachi using swords, he still outspeeds him.
Zoro vs Kurubi. Okay, now we have Zoro vs Kurubi, and since Zoro was strong enough even injured to beat Hachi, then Kurubi should be no problem for Zoro at all.
Sanji vs Arlong. The cook is already injured, on top of him being a sorrier Luffy in terms of combat at this point. Arlong takes it. Sanji vs Tashigi. Tashigi, and yes, I'm counting this against him. Sanji vs Baroque 100. I don't doubt that he could just dodge and clear all the men, and that seems like a very Oda type gag for all the men to be KO'd and the women are still standing, but regardless, the 100 assassins would win because you can't make it past this bitch. Sanji vs Luffy. Luffy and Zoro are equals at least until Alabasta, and Sanji is weaker than Zoro, so yeah, Luffy wins.
Zoro vs the Unluckies. I don't think we should be wasting our time talking about the unluckies, so Zoro just looks at them and they die. Zoro vs Mr. 2. Now we're in Alabasta, and this is definitely Zoro and Sanji's most interesting fight so far. So for Zoro, he'll be fighting Mr. 2, Sanji will be fighting Mr. 1. So Zoro's matchup against Mr. 2 will be a pretty good matchup because Mr. 2 was able to give Sanji a decent fight. Zoro will not have the breath of all things because that's something he only unlocked once fighting against a steel man, but he should still be able to beat Mr. 2 since Sanji was able to do so.
Sanji vs Mr. 1. Mr. 1 takes it. I don't doubt that Sanji could just outspeed him like Zoro did, but there's just no way for him to get around his steel. This will be a major problem for Sanji throughout the next few fights. he can't clash with durable / sharp metal until he gets Haki. Yes, there is that gag scene with Zoro, but it's way more consistent to say that Sanji is weak to metallic attacks until the time skip. Sanji versus Braham. Sanji. I know at this point in the show, Sanji really doesn't have any ranged attacks to speak of, but I personally think that he would find some way to beat Braham. After all, he's smarter than Zoro, and the Shandian literally got hit once and died, so it really does depend on whether or not you think Sanji can outsmart Braham. Sanji versus Ohm. Now, I cannot say the same for this fight. Zoro barely beat Ohm as is, and Sanji doesn't have a ranged attack, can't clash with metal, and on top of all that, Ohm can predict his moves. The Skypiea takes it. Unfortunately, I can't cap Sanji out of this one. Sanji versus T-Bone. This fight's another tough one. Sanji.
Zoro vs Wanzi. As for Zoro, he will be fighting against Wanzi, and Zoro would definitely chef him up, but can he make him into a Fedellini like Sanji can? I don't think so. Zoro vs Bluno. Up next we have a more serious fighter in Bluno on the sea train, but Zoro should still be able to comfortably beat him. After Bluno, Zoro will be fighting Khalifa, and unlucky for Khalifa because Zoro does not have the same moral compass as Sanji does. Miss Monday can attest to that. This is an easy Zoro win. Zoro vs Jyabura. Up next we have Jyabura, who is the 3rd strongest of CP9, and since Zoro can beat Kaku, who is the 2nd strongest of CP9, Jyabura will be a decently tough fight for Zoro, but Zoro will take this W.
Sanji versus Kaku. Now this fight hurt my brain. I asked not only Zage, but you guys as well, for who would win this fight. Again, you could just say, well, Kaku has a higher power level than Jyabura, so he just wins. But it's not that simple at all. Sanji has quite a few factors in favor of him. First of all, the gap between Kaku and Jyabura is not that far. Fukuro said that an average marine has a Doriki of 10, and the difference between these two is only 20. The gap between them is fodder, essentially, whereas the gap between Kaku and Lucci is like a company of soldiers. Now, this is just their base forms as well. Accounting for their devil fruits, Kaku has a basic Zoan, whereas Jyabura has a carnivorous Zoan that he's more experienced with. So their final forms shouldn't be that far apart from each other. Even without Diable Jambe, Sanji was easily able to break Jabura's iron body. Jyabura is a master of this style who can actually move while using it, so it only makes sense that he has the more durable technique. However, Sanji has some factors against him as well. Of course, Kaku fights with Sanji's weakness, sharp metal, but unlike the last few opponents, I think he can find an opening on the assassin without having to clash with his swords. Diable Jambe is also a last resort at this point. He can't spam it yet, and he can seemingly only use it for 3 attacks. But if Sanji lands at least 2 Diable hits, he wins. As you can see, this fight is very contentious. Do you think Kaku's blades and cutting attacks will overwhelm Sanji? Or do you think the cook could do his job and sear the giraffe with Diable Jambe? I personally think it's the latter option, so Sanji wins extreme diff. Sanji versus Shu. Sanji wins. I know Shu has rust powers and shit, but he was taken down by Firebird Star in the anime.
Zoro vs Absalom. Okay, so now we're in Thriller Bark and Zoro will be going up against the leader of the General Zombies, Absalom. Absalom is a pretty strong fighter in his own right, and he will be a tricky opponent due to the invisibility fruit. However, Zoro will still get the W out of this because he won't have to care about things like Nami's white dress being stained in blood like, Sanji had to do.
Sanji versus Ryuma. So all 3 Monster Trio members did get power-ups during Thriller Bark. Luffy started using Gear 2nd and 3rd at the same time, Zoro got Shusui, and Sanji can use Diable Jambe a few more times. Zoro incinerated Ryuma mid-diff with only 2 swords, so I don't think it's impossible for Sanji to do the same. Sanji versus Kuma. Again, the question isn't whether Sanji can win or not, but more of can he survive. For the nothing happened moment, there really is no facts or logic that you can apply to it to make it make sense. It really just came down to sheer willpower on Zoro's part. So the question is, can Sanji do the same? That's a question for the comments. I honestly can't answer that without pissing people off.
Zoro vs Ivankov. Now we have Zoro vs Ivankov before the time skip, and Zoro gets destroyed badly. Moving on.
Sanji versus baboons. Even if they have swords, I don't doubt that Sanji could beat all of them like Zoro did. Now we're on to post Timeskip, where both characters have haki, but the problem is it's very hard to gauge their actual strength until Wano. They're mostly portrayed as equals before that though, so most of their fights will probably go the same. Sanji versus Hori. Not only did Zoro no diff, but Sanji might actually be faster than him in the water. Sanji easily.
Zoro vs Watatsumi. Zoro vs Watatsumi is an easy fight for Zoro, especially if he's getting help from Jinbei. No diff.
Sanji versus Hyozu. Now that he has haki, blades are no issue to him.
Zoro vs Virgo. Up next we move on to Punk Hazard, where Zoro will be fighting against Virgo. So in the original fight between Sanji and Virgo, no one really won the fight since both opponents had to leave the area due to the poison. However, Sanji was implied to be on the losing end of that fight. So the question becomes, can Zoro do any better? At this point in the story, Zoro isn't pushed to his limit by any of his opponents early post Timeskip, so we don't really get a good read on Zoro's full power, which will become relevant for the next fight, but let's hold our horses. Virgo is a pretty strong fighter in his own right, with his armament haki being noted to be tough. However, Zoro has shown that he can beat full body armament haki he uses in Pika, and Law was able to cut through Virgo's armament haki with only a single amputee, so Zoro should have more than enough power to defeat Virgo.
Sanji versus Fujitora. Unfortunately, this fight is a literal no diff. Sanji can't beat Doflamingo, who gets one shot by any admiral. And it's even worse because he doesn't even have a ranged attack like Zoro did.
Zoro vs Doflamingo. This will definitely be the most contentious fight for Zoro, as he'll be going up against Don Quixote Doflamingo. If we keep things in context of how Sanji entered the fight, then Zoro has no chance of beating Dofi in the air. If you remember, Zoro was on mainland Dressrosa, whilst Dofi was threatening the crew out on sea, and Zoro didn't have the means to get to the crew on time and also have an aerial battle, which is why Sanji took the job. However, that's a boring conclusion to come to. So what if Zoro fought Doflamingo on land? As I alluded to earlier, we don't get a real idea of Zoro's true strength prior to the Wano arc. However, there is a way of getting a good idea of where he roughly scales. In Act 2 of Wano, Zoro fought against Kyoshiro, also known as Dendro. Zoro didn't get any major power-ups throughout the time skip, so even when accounting for island-to-island buffs the destroyers generally get, Zoro in early Wano should be relatively the same as he was in Dressrosa. Zoro was noted by the spectators for being tough due to keeping up with Kyoshiro. If you recall, Zoro had lost Shusui, so this is two sworn Zoro that's given Dendro a decent fight. Dendro is clearly a lot more relaxed in the fight, and he isn't even using the Oden style, which we know he can use. Dendro is stated in the Vivid card for having the greatest swordsmanship of all the scabbards, which includes Sulong Inuarashi, who is stronger than Jack. So if Zoro had all three of his swords against Dendro, he should be around that level of strength, if not stronger. Doflamingo on the other hand was comfortably outperforming Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd Luffy even after getting hit with the Gamma Knife. Dofi was able to endure Gear 4 Luffy's attacks, could block a double Calvin with his awakening, and could outlast the initial time limit of Gear 4th. As the captain, Luffy has narratively always been stronger than Zoro, and when he's not, they are on par with each other. So Zoro shouldn't be completely outclassed in Luffy's performance versus Dofi. Luffy also had help so he can wait for his haki to return after using Gear 4, as without it, Dofi could have just beat a haki-less Luffy, and Zoro should be scaling to Luffy who has those limitations.
Obviously, the first interpretation conflicts with my scaling because I believe that Doflamingo is leagues below Denjiro and Killer, who are able to press Zoro. Overall though, we don't really think that Zoro is as strong as Dofi at this point in the story, so even if we give them their fair ones, he still doesn't win. It's a high diff fight for sure though. Sanji versus Pika. This is another one I asked you guys about in a poll. Most people agreed that Sanji can defeat Pika, just not in the way that Zoro did. Let's get this out of the way first. Sanji in Dressrosa should be mountain, if not large mountain level, in terms of AP. This means that he could destroy Pika's stone if he wanted to. However, most people cited his DC as being the problem. While that may be true, I want to remind you guys that the cook doesn't necessarily have to defeat Pika like Zoro did. Due to his speciality in observation haki, Sanji might have an easier time finding his opponent. Not only that, but he can also fly on his own. So overall, I think Sanji can defeat Pika with far less turmoil than Zoro did.
Zoro vs Judge. Moving on to Whole Cake Island, Zoro will be fighting all the opponents Sanji did within this arc. The first being Vinsmoke Judge. Judge is not Zoro's father, so Zoro does not have the mental conflict that Sanji did within this fight, so Zoro should be able to comfortably take this W. Zoro vs Luffy. Up next, we have Zoro vs Luffy. Now, we have seen this fight before in Whiskey Peak, but would it go down the same way in Whole Cake Island? If we attach the same narrative conditions as the original fight with Sanji and Luffy, then Luffy would just let Zoro win. However, if they were to actually duke it out to see who is stronger like they did in Whiskey Peak, then it kind of just depends on your opinion of Zoro, since we don't really know his full power. If you really think he was stronger than the captain, then I guess Zoro would win.
Ain't gonna happen.
If you're like me and think that narratively Luffy probably was stronger than Zoro because he is the captain and Oda's probably going to keep the dynamics similar to that, then Luffy would win. But you guys can tell us what you think in the comments below. Zoro vs Daifuku. Moving on to the wedding, Zoro would comfortably deal with Daifuku, protect Puddin, and if he really has to by order of Luffy or something, then he could protect Germa as well. It doesn't really matter for Zoro. Zoro vs Oven. As for Oven, the same thing applies. The only difference is that Zoro needs to deal with Oven and protect Pound really quickly, so the fact that Puddin is now working with the Straw Hats isn't exposed. That's why Sanji went into that super speed mode, so he could protect Pound without Oven knowing that Puddin's actually working with Sanji. So Zoro could essentially do the same thing with Ashishi Sonson and knock out Oven, and they can go on their merry way. Zoro vs Page 1. Okay, so now we are finally in Wano. So for Zoro's first matchup, he will be going up against Page 1 in Act 2. He still has 3 swords at this point, so Zoro should be able to deal with Page 1 just like Sanji did pretty easily.
Sanji versus Yukimaru and Killer. Due to Zoro handling Yuki with just 2 swords, on top of a woman being involved, Sanji is not losing to either of these guys, even if he has to pull out the raid suit. Sanji versus Denjiro. Denjiro takes it. Denji has the best swordsmanship out of all the scabbards, but regardless if you think he's the most powerful or not, he still ranks above the Tobiroppo. At this point in the story, Sanji, even with the raid suit, is still struggling with Page 1, and that's even if he gets to equip the suit, because the Straw Hats are fighting on a time limit here.
Zoro vs X Drake. Moving on to the Flower Capital after Yasuo's death, the Straw Hats are fighting on a time limit and Zoro doesn't even have all 3 of his swords since Gukimaru took Shusui, but this shouldn't really matter as Zoro should be able to keep Toko safe just like Sanji did, and there isn't anything to say that he would perform worse than his counterpart against X Drake. Zoro vs Black Maria. Now we are in the raid of Onigashima. So for Zoro's first matchup, he will be going up against Black Maria. And for my answer, I refer you to the Khalifa section.
Sanji on Rooftop. Now, I almost didn't count this one, not only because it's a team battle, but also for Sanji's sake. By replacing Zoro, you basically remove the second, if not the most valuable team member on the Rooftop crew. Sanji cannot damage the Yonko or save Luffy if that same situation happened. He cannot block Hakai, the same attack that had everyone on the roof scared shitless, and even if he somehow did, awakened his Germa genes and turned on Ifrit Jambe instantly, it still probably wouldn't be enough, cause he can't go toe-to-toe with Kaido like Zoro did. Overall, if Sanji replaced Zoro on the Rooftop, that situation would have gone way worse.
Zoro vs King and Queen. When Sanji fought King and Queen, Zoro was still bandaged up due to the Rooftop battle, but even if Zoro was okay, he had a senzu bean, he still wouldn't beat King and Queen together at this point in the story. Zoro vs Queen. Now the final matchups will be when the stars take the stage, but this time Zoro will be fighting against Queen. Zoro has shown in the Rooftop battle that he can damage both base and dragon form Kaido, which are more durable than Queen. He can even leave a permanent scar on Kaido using Ashura, so Queen's durability isn't an issue. Queen's speed also won't be an issue as Zoro has dashing attacks that can blitz Kaido. Even if the fight somehow drags on to where Zoro is fighting against Enma and Zoro will need to figure out how to truly tame the sword, King of Hell Zoro would instantly beat Queen with no difficulty.
A more interesting match, however, is Sanji versus King. This fight deserves its own video, but I'll try my best to break it down here. So, many people think that King is just a dumbass who turned his flame off for no reason, and got cocky in his fight with Zoro. However, it's implied multiple times that Zoro's KOH attacks can hurt King with his flames on. For instance, why does he dodge this onigiri? Why does he go tit for tat with Zoro in these panels, even though he's invincible? That explanation makes much more sense for how King was acting in the battle, rather than just saying, well, he's just Yes, Zoro thinks to himself that there's no point in attacking while King's flames are on, but this was right before he starts realizing the truth and figures out that King is still scared of him. He even points this out. So it's much more plausible to say that King, with his flames on, can be damaged by Advanced Conqueror's Haki, which is the reason why he had to turn his flames off and rely on his speed to defeat Zoro. So no, he's not just a cocky idiot who tried to defeat Zoro quickly. The only other argument I could see against this is Zoro already having Ryo. For those who don't know, Advanced Armament Haki, or Ryo, has 2 levels to it. The first level is a protective coating to put on attacks that makes them hit way harder, and the second level expands this range into an opponent's body, basically acting as durability negation. Enma is said to draw out its user's Ryo, which is how Zoro cut Kaido at first. However, it's never stated to what extent Zoro can use this technique, and judging by how he reacted to Luffy's Red Rock, he probably doesn't have the second level of Ryo. So no, Zoro doesn't have durability negation until Advanced Conqueror's Haki. But you know, back to Sanji. Assuming that he awakens his Germa genes, King would push him to, it still probably wouldn't make a difference. Let me just go through this stat by stat for a second. In terms of speed, most people think that Flames Off King gets blitzed by Sanji, but this version of him is able to blitz Zoro, who is overall more powerful than Big Mom. Everyone likes to call Big Mom slow for some reason, but remember, Sanji is only blitzing Queen. Like, what does that even mean? This feat really doesn't do anything for him when you really look at it. All it says is that he is faster than Queen, who is overall more powerful than the characters below him. But what does this mean for Sanji? Is he as fast as the Admirals? Is he as fast as Kaido? We really don't know. But what we do know is that there's no evidence for him being faster than Big Mom. I have whole videos on why Zoro is stronger than Big Mom, but let's just say you don't agree with that take. Let's just say that Germa Awakened Sanji plus Ifrit Janbei is faster than Flames Off King. This would obviously lead King to using his Flames On mode, in which Sanji can't damage him. Funny enough, King could just use the same strategy that Zoro did on him and wait for Sanji to attack. At this point, it just becomes a battle of attrition. King will wait for Sanji to vanish, which he can't do much because it zaps his stamina, and then when the cook tags him, he'll just counter. But Shad X, what about Sanji's durability? He's indestructible. Most people state this by bypassing the fact that Queen was still damaging Sanji while his Germa genes were on. Yes, the 5 siblings are extremely durable. They can tank a hydraulic press, and even swords breaking over their heads. What about a Haki-infused sword though? What about Magma? If Sanji is taking crazy damage from Queen's attacks, then King is going to be even worse. In summary, there's no proof of Sanji being faster than King, and even if he was, King will just turn his flames on and wait for Sanji to attack. At this point, it becomes a war of attrition, which King will win when Sanji's stamina is gone. The Lunarian takes this one, and depending on how strong you think Zoro is, it might not even be close. To wrap up this video, let's see who really won in the end. Zoro won 18 out of 23 of his fights, ending up with a 78% win rate, whereas Sanji won 15 out of 27 fights, ending up with a 55% win rate. So all in all, Zoro is the victor. That pretty much does it for this video though, so tell me what y'all think in the comments. Can Zoro defeat Doflamingo? Can Sanji defeat King? These are all things I want you guys to discuss. I'll see y'all next week. Bye.